Japan, Unit 731. Between 1937 and 1945, during Japan's occupation of parts of China, the Imperial Japanese Army ran a secret program known as Unit 731. Officially described as a disease prevention and water purification unit, it functioned as a human testing ground for biological and chemical warfare. Thousands were used as test subjects. Estimates place those killed directly inside Unit 731 facilities at around 3,000, while historians believe tens of thousands more died from diseases deliberately released into nearby civilian populations. Prisoners and civilians were intentionally infected with plague, cholera, anthrax, typhoid, and syphilis to observe disease progression inside the human body. Some were injected, others were forced to inhale bacteria or drink contaminated water. Vivisections were performed on living subjects without anesthesia to study infected organs in real time. Limbs were amputated to examine blood loss. Arms were frozen, shattered, and thawed to study frostbite. Victims were also exposed to extreme heat, pressure, dehydration, explosives, flamethrowers, and chemical agents. None were meant to survive. As Japan's defeat became inevitable, evidence was systematically destroyed. Facilities were dismantled, bodies burned, and remaining prisoners killed to eliminate witnesses. After the war, senior members of Unit 731 were granted immunity by the United States in exchange for their research data. The findings were classified, prosecutors were blocked, and no major trials were held, leaving the true scale of the crimes largely unacknowledged. United States, MKUltra. In the early 1950s, during the Cold War, the United States launched a secret CIA program known as MKUltra to study mind control, interrogation, and psychological breakdown, driven by fears that enemy states could manipulate human behavior. Over the next 2 decades, the program expanded into hundreds of sub-experiments conducted in universities, military facilities, prisons, hospitals, and covert safe houses. An estimated 10,000 to 20,000 people were affected, most without their knowledge or consent. Subjects included soldiers, prisoners, psychiatric patients, civilians, and even CIA employees. Many were secretly given LSD, often in extremely high doses, sometimes repeatedly over days or weeks. Others were exposed to mescaline, psilocybin, amphetamines, barbiturates, and experimental chemicals. Some were kept in isolation, deprived of sleep, or placed in sensory deprivation chambers. In certain experiments, individuals were confined in dark rooms, stripped naked, and forced to listen to recorded messages on a loop for hours or days to break their sense of identity. The psychological effects were severe. Subjects reported paranoia, hallucinations, panic attacks, memory loss, and long-term mental illness. As scrutiny increased in the 1970s, most MKUltra files were deliberately destroyed. Only fragments survived, leaving the full scope of the program permanently incomplete and many victims without acknowledgement of what had been done to them. Soviet Union, Kyshtym disaster. In 1957, a secret nuclear complex inside the Soviet Union suffered a catastrophic radioactive accident. The facility was part of the nuclear weapons program and located in a closed city, a place that officially did not exist. The town housing the workers had no real name and was identified only by a postal code. It did not appear on public maps or official records. Residents were forbidden from telling outsiders where they lived or what they did. Even most Soviet citizens had no idea the city existed. When a storage tank containing highly radioactive waste overheated and exploded, radiation spread across the surrounding region. Entire villages were contaminated. People continued daily life, unaware they had been exposed to radiation. Within days, civilians suffered burns, vomiting, hair loss, and organ failure. Some villages were evacuated weeks later, only after severe exposure. Others were silenced completely. Their names were removed from records and houses destroyed, as if these places had never existed. Estimates suggest hundreds died immediately, while thousands more suffered long-term illness and cancer. Doctors were instructed not to list radiation as a cause of death. Medical files were classified. The disaster was never reported. For more than 30 years, the Soviet government denied it entirely, acknowledging it only in the late 1980s, long after the victims and evidence had vanished. Germany, East German doping program. From the 1960s through the late 1980s, East Germany ran a secret, state-controlled doping program to dominate international competition, particularly the Olympic Games. Athletic success was treated as political capital, and athletes were used to project national power on a global stage. Thousands of competitors were systematically given performance-enhancing drugs, most commonly oral turinabol, an anabolic steroid. Many were minors. Athletes were told the substances were vitamins or recovery aids. Dosages were controlled by doctors and sports scientists under direct state authority. The damage was permanent. Athletes suffered liver failure, infertility, hormonal collapse, and irreversible physical changes. Female athletes developed deepened voices and long-term reproductive disorders. Psychological trauma followed many into adulthood. The program was meticulously documented, concealed under code names, and enforced through surveillance. When East Germany collapsed, records revealed the scale of the operation. Some officials were prosecuted, but many victims received limited justice. The exposure permanently altered global sport, leading to stricter anti-doping controls and oversight after the system proved it could be corrupted at the highest level. China, Tiananmen Square protests. In 1989, as China opened economically but remained politically rigid, students and intellectuals called for political reform, transparency, and accountability. What began as public mourning became a large demonstration centered around Tiananmen Square. As the protests grew, the government declared them a threat to stability. In early June, martial law was imposed. Military units entered Beijing with armored vehicles and live ammunition. Soldiers fired on civilians along major roads leading toward the square. People attempting to block the advance were shot. Others were beaten or crushed. Bodies were removed quickly, hospitals were monitored, and families were warned not to speak. The government has never released an official death toll. Independent estimates range from several hundred to several thousand killed, with many deaths never formally recorded. Afterward, the state focused on erasing the event, a system known as the Great Firewall. The incident was removed from school textbooks and public discussion became taboo. On domestic platforms, searches for related terms are filtered or blocked, often returning unrelated results. Around the anniversary each year, keywords and symbols linked to the date are temporarily restricted, with posts deleted and accounts suspended within minutes. Today, many younger citizens inside mainland China grow up without ever learning the event occurred. Tiananmen Square remains open and heavily guarded, but there is no marker or memorial acknowledging what happened. The violence ended in 1989, but the suppression of memory continues until now. Italy, Vajont dam disaster. In the early 1960s, northern Italy was home to one of the tallest dams ever built. The Vajont Dam stood in a narrow mountain valley, holding back millions of cubic meters of water, and was promoted as a symbol of modern engineering and national progress. Officials and engineers already knew the mountain above the reservoir was unstable. Cracks were recorded. Sections of the slope were slowly moving. Smaller landslides had already fallen into the water. Internal reports warned that a massive collapse was possible. Instead of shutting the project down, authorities continued operating the dam and attempted to manage the risk by adjusting water levels. On the night of October 9th, 1963, the mountain gave way. An estimated 520 million tons of rock collapsed into the reservoir in seconds, violently displacing the water and creating a wave that surged more than 200 meters high within the valley. The water overtopped the dam by roughly 100 meters and rushed downstream. Entire towns were hit by a wall of water several stories high. Buildings were flattened instantly. People were killed in their sleep with no warning. Nearly 2,000 people died within minutes. The disaster was described as an unavoidable natural event. Responsibility was shifted toward geology rather than human decisions. Legal proceedings stretched on for years, resulting in limited sentences compared to the scale of the deaths. India, Bhopal gas leak. In December 1984, a pesticide plant in Bhopal released a massive cloud of toxic gas into the city while most residents were asleep. The facility sat beside densely populated neighborhoods. The gas was methyl isocyanate, an extremely poisonous chemical used in pesticide production. As it spread through the streets, people woke up coughing violently, their eyes burning, unable to breathe. Many collapsed where they stood. Others ran blindly through the dark as their lungs filled with fluid. Children and the elderly were among the first to die. Within hours, several thousand people were dead. Most estimates place immediate deaths between 3,000 and 8,000, with over 500,000 exposed. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Victims arrived vomiting, convulsing, blinded, and gasping for air. The gas caused chemical burns, acute lung failure, and cardiac collapse. Survivors suffered lasting damage. Tens of thousands later developed chronic respiratory disease, neurological disorders, blindness, immune system damage, and reproductive problems. Birth defects and developmental disabilities increased sharply in exposed communities. After the disaster, the response was extremely slow. The company initially refused to fully disclose the chemical composition of the gas, leaving doctors without clear treatment guidance. The event was publicly downplayed. The plant site was never fully cleaned. South Korea, brothers' home. In the 1970s and 1980s, as South Korea prepared for the Asian Games and the Olympics, authorities aimed to present a spotless national image. Homeless individuals, disabled people, orphans, and those without ID were seen as a liability. Police rounded them up without warrants, sending them to so-called welfare centers like Brothers Home. Inside, detainees lost their names and became numbered units, valued only for the labor they could produce. They worked 12 to 18 hours a day, making goods and doing industrial labor for profit. Cruelty was efficient. Guards used beatings to enforce compliance. Food and medical care were minimal. Deaths from exhaustion and malnutrition were common and treated as convenient. Official records listed over 500 deaths, but the real toll was likely far higher. Bodies were buried in unmarked graves and families were never informed. The system operated with state backing. Police delivered people directly to the facility and inspections were staged. When the abuse was revealed, the director was punished for embezzlement, not for the human rights abuses. Most officials faced no consequences. What was called welfare was, in reality, a system that erased people for the sake of order and appearance. Alright folks, which story disturbed you the most? Comment below. And if your government is hiding something people should know about, share it here. The truth only stays hidden when nobody speaks.